Hi everyone, this is Rebecca from ChemKnits, and I'm here today with another dyeing experiment. Today we're going to dye with Delphinium Blue. It's a Wilton food coloring that contains both blue and red dyes in the ingredients and is said to separate. And in order to look at these separations, we are going to dye with dry wool. This is some unknown wool that was given to me by a very generous woman who is encouraging me and helping me learn how to spin. And so by adding this dry, it will give more opportunities not only for the colors to separate onto the wool, but also to give us a more mottled color overall, which will be really fun to spin. So I've got about 8 cups of water on the stove, and to that I'm going to add a 1/4 cup of white vinegar to be our acid source. If you find that the colors aren't absorbing as well as you'd like, you can always add more acid. Stir that up. And now for the dye. I have not yet worked with Delphinium Blue, and like all paste food colorings, I could do a kettle dyed effect by adding the dye after, but because, this gel dye, it's a little more difficult to mix. I've got like just a very good coating on this fork, and you can see this deep blue bloom here. Because it is a paste, it does not, I think, because it is a paste, it doesn't necessarily dissolve as quickly, and I would rather not have a real mismatched glob. So if I was going to space dye the roving by adding the dye after, I would pre-mix the dye into a smaller volume, and then I would, after the wool was in the pot, I would add it slowly. And instead, what we're going to do here is bring this to a boil and then reduce the temperature so it's just below a boil, because we want as little agitation as possible to not fill the wool. So here I've got the pot at a heavy boil, and I'm going to turn down the heat until I can get the bubbles to go away. There, because we're going to want as little agitation as possible. This wool is in all kinds of different balls and shapes, but I'm just going to add it as is and see how well it sinks. I'm going to use a slotted spoon to gently submerge it. Oh, that's cool. Can you see there's like more blue parts and more purple parts already? Wow. And this looks positively teal. I may not know exactly what we're going to end up with here, but it certainly is going to be pretty. Come down, heat a bit more if I can. Submerge it, and let's see if I can add a little more. The wool is taking up a bit less volume than I thought. I wish I had added more water to start with. But this is why these dyeing experiments are so fun. I don't know what to expect. And I still have a ton of this wool left. Alright, everything seems to be submerged. I'm going to cover this. And the heat is on the very lowest level possible. And so I'm going to let this sit for 10 minutes. So around 10 minutes have elapsed, and thankfully we do not see any bubbling. It is possible for heat to get trapped below, but I don't think that's necessarily a problem. Now what I don't know if you can see, there's like a ring of red around the edge. If I pull this aside a bit, can you see? Yeah. So you can see that there's certainly a darker color. I'm not sure if you can tell that it's red, but we definitely have some awesome separation of color going on here. And the color is starting to clear as well. But there's still a fair amount of blue in the water, so I'm not going to remove the heat at this point. I am going to let this sit under this very low heat for another 10 minutes. You can see there's still a lot of color in the water, but compared to where it was before, it has mostly cleared. And this amount of blue that's remaining should absorb into the yarn as I let this cool enough so that way I can safely touch and remove the roving. So not only am I going to leave it uncovered to help with the cooling process, I'm also going to shift it to another burner to remove it from the source of heat. This should all help it cool a little faster. So after, an hour or so, the water cooled enough that I feel comfortable pulling it out, and I really wanted to show you what it looks like, because we see this beautiful teal on top, but beneath we've got this purple and dark blue. I'm in the way of the light. I don't want to agitate it too much. I'm just placing it in a colander. It's still a bit warm. Look at that blue and purple. Still a bit warm, so I'm going to put the colander down in the sink to let this drain and cool before I rinse the fiber out. So I'm going to wash the wool gently with just cold water and dish soap. I want to rinse any excess dye and or vinegar out, and let's see, yeah, and the water is already running clear, which is a good sign, because we do not want any, we want all the dye to be attached to the fiber. And yes, we've got some really gorgeous colors in here. And after I've rinsed the fiber, I'll leave it in the colander for the water to drip out and let it dry for a couple days, and I will show you what it looks like once it's dried. So here we have it, the effects of breaking Delphinium Blue, which created a surprisingly large amount of pink a purpley blue, and then this bright, vibrant teal that we got from the wool that we added towards the end. And I want to point out that, you know, some of the stuff we added at the end has these bits of pink. And I think that some of this is the result of the red dye starting to crash out of solution because of the high acid content. So you want to be careful when you're rinsing, because if the red dye crashes out, you could end up with some dye particles in the wool or in your yarn that could rub off on your hand later. But this can be resolved by just additional rinses. I'm very excited by the way that the color came out, and from just, you know, adding the wool in slowly dry, we got to see an effect that happens on so much of our cake and other kettle dyed yarns, where a lot of the red absorbs first and then we go to a more blue color. And I will also say that I replicated this by doing a second pot, so that way I would have even more fiber to dye. And this, I'm really excited to take this to my spinning wheel. So anyway, I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and thank you so much for coming along with me on this dyeing experiment.